Hi, everyone. This is Brian. Got a special podcast today. If you listened to our last podcast, you heard from Erin from ASQE, learned a little bit about her background and some of the work that ASQE is doing to understand what's going on in the market with corporations and businesses and what their needs are and how they're doing on a variety of different topics, but especially some new stuff on environmental, social, and governance or ESG initiatives. So we talked about some recent reports, and then this podcast is going to be a deep dive into one specific one. Title is Utilizing Lean to Minimize Waste Within ESG Initiatives. And so with me and Erin is Beth Cudney, and she's also one of the contributors to that paper with myself, where we added comments based on our experience and insights into that report. So what we thought we'd do is do some quick introductions and then dive into the report, talk about it, share our thoughts around it, see where the conversation takes us, and then go from there. Erin, you want to reintroduce yourself, but we definitely, if you want to learn more about Erin, go to the last podcast we had, and I'll have a lot of links for a lot of these in the show notes as well. So welcome, Erin.
Oh, thank you. And good to be with you both. And so, yeah, as Brian mentioned, I went a little more depth into my background in the first podcast that we had recorded. But yeah, my to sum it up, for the last 20 plus years, I've been working in a variety of industries. A lot of them are production focused. So I originally came up in the printing and publishing industry. With that, I had degrees, undergrad degrees in marketing, and then also another one in business administration. But then in 2010, I pivoted into full-time in retail. I'd always had kind of a background in retail as a part-time job growing up in my high school years, but then went full-time into retail and got really heavily involved in digital commerce. In 2010, my career, I decided to pivot and went into digital development and websites and e-commerce very heavily. So in retail for a major corporate retailer that's based in Wisconsin, and was a part of the team that built apps. We built websites. We built different UX designs for customers, and I was part of the merchandising for that effort. Then in 2018, I was recruited to come, and in 2020, I was actually part of the team that developed ASQ Excellence, or what is we call ASQE. And the two organizations are symbiotic; they complement each other. And so for 75 plus years, ASQ has been that personal association for the quality industry. It develops professionals through their certification, credentialing, education, as well as the member communities, and that still continues today. And then ASQE, we actually serve organizations. So ASQ had org members. They had organizations such as General Motors and Abbott Laboratories. In 2020, when ASQE was established as a trade association, that's when those organizations came over to be on the ASQE side. And our main focus on ASQE side is developing research, which is actually what we're talking about today and which you both have contributed to, but also the certification side. So we actually work very heavily on certification development, coming from a lot of those research trends and basically kind of modernizing the skill set as we need to. But both organizations, both ASQ and ASQE, work hand in hand to advance the quality industry. So that's just a little bit about my experience. And then recently, in the last year or so, I obtained my master's degree in sustainable management. I've been really pushing hard on connecting the different types of quality methodologies that align to sustainability, which both of you are very familiar with. So I'm very excited that as subject matter experts, that both of you could contribute to our research because it helps give that real world flavor to what we're working on. So thanks for having me again.
All right, I'll go ahead. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Beth Cudney. I am currently a professor of data analytics at Maryville University, and I'm also the program coordinator for the Master's in Data Analytics. I'll give you kind of a little bit of a background, kind of starting back at the very beginning. My undergrad degree is from North Carolina State University in industrial engineering, and that was way back in 1996. After that, I joined the automotive industry, worked for Dana, Spicer Axle Division, and then Jacobs Vehicle Systems as a quality engineer and as an industrial engineer. And that's when I really got heavily involved in Lean and Six Sigma, started the Lean journey in the late 90s. And it was kind of an interesting path for me because I honestly pushed back and did not want to do it initially. But my career for the last 25 years has really been based in Lean and Six Sigma. So it's kind of fortuitous path that I took that I initially resisted. But after that, working in the automotive industry for about 10 years, I had the opportunity, once I finished my first master's in mechanical engineering and I was working on my MBA, I had the opportunity to teach as an adjunct. Absolutely loved it. Was not my career plan whatsoever, but then decided to go back for my doctorate. So then I went back and did my PhD in engineering management from Missouri S&T, and then started teaching in quality, developed a program in Lean and Six Sigma. And while I'm in academia, everything that I do is very applied when it comes to the research. So I've worked with John Deere, the Veterans Healthcare Administration, Boeing, lots of different hospitals, more on the practical applications versus the theoretical research, because I think that has such a broader impact. And then about 4 years ago, I joined Maryville University, again, as a program coordinator and a professor of data analytics, with how the quality and Lean Six Sigma world has been focusing more on quality 4.0. It's been really kind of a nice natural progression because of all the advanced tools that we can make use of in time and programming with R, pulling data with SQL, finding better ways to analyze large amounts of data that we're all very, very focused with. And part of that shift has also been ESG initiatives as well, too. So really looking at what's happening within industry. And about 8 or 9 years ago, I really started focusing on how to integrate environmental and sustainability initiatives, specifically into Lean initially, because of the natural with waste and how they're handled within the environment. And so that led me on a journey of starting to write a book. And as I said, it was a long journey. It was about 8 years ago it started. And it was finally published last fall. It's entitled Lean Sustainability. And my goal really is to make sure that people understand the integration, because sustainability and Lean and Six Sigma, there is a natural integration between the two. And it's really all about finding the best way for organizations to do this. As we talk about, I think the study, a few things that I'll highlight, and based on my experiences, it's very difficult for organizations to set up a whole separate sustainability initiative, staff that with resources and time and effort. So my work over the last 8 years has been trying to find a way to really integrate them more on the Lean side, since so many companies are already working on Lean and Six Sigma initiatives. So this is just kind of adding another little tool. So hopefully it's not a big lift for organizations. And I think that's part of more of where I've in life gone as well, too. So I won't get off on the philosophical tangent, but hitting 50 and realizing kind of where we're at, and now also being in a position where I can find the time and really focus on making improvements that make a big difference to the world. It's a lot more fun. So I'm really excited about this study, and I was so excited to be a part of it.
I'm so glad you identified a few things that you said, Beth. So Brian, if you don't mind, I'll just say a little bit about kind of the journey that ASQE has been on too, because our whole mission is to advance the industry and help organizations perform. And what you touched on, Beth, is exactly that. A lot of them are already doing the work. They just don't realize that's what it is. And so I feel like this came really prevalent throughout my education with my master's, is that quality professionals are naturally suited to do this. They just don't realize that the terminology might be slightly different. They can at least go into doing this type of work. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, Beth, it sounds similar to my journey too. I studied statistics and quality management in school, and got a job at an aerospace company. And it took me, probably 6 or 7 years into it, where I started to understand environmental challenges and noticed that all the learning I had around Lean and Six Sigma at the company, or classes I put together, developed, did the same kind of thing, put together a Six Sigma program. Company I was already doing Lean, so I learned it through a training that was there, and some of the people that had gone and done training with Boeing and brought that back. I started to see, hey, there's other problems out there besides yield and cost reductions, and this structure of what we're teaching is the exact same. There's data, and you look at the data and you look at the process and you identify the waste and break down the data into different groups. And it's like, well, that's going to translate very nicely, but there wasn't a whole lot out there except for maybe some stuff on the EPA had put out around Lean and Six Sigma and how it could reduce environmental impacts. So that was really helpful for me to get my head around it. I said, oh, these are all the tools I'm teaching already. This is great. And then I had to just learn what all these problems were and what climate change was and carbon and methane and composting and recycling. And that took some time too. I actually went back to school and got a sustainability certificate at University of Iowa. And that gave me a little more confidence to speak the language and then say, and there's a whole set of tools already out there that we can use to help us. And so, yeah, same thing. I'm at the same age and figuring out like I want to have a more important impact, not just on helping companies be more profitable. It's not as inspiring as helping them reduce energy or take out waste or find a home for materials or recapture materials from their customers and reuse them in their processes. So it's great to see ASQ and ASQE kind of taking on this as well. That means the businesses are wanting this and that it's becoming something important to them. It's great.
Yeah, 100%. And we see that too in the orgs we serve. Many of them are publicly traded. It goes back to our mission. If we're going to be good stewards to help our orgs advance, we have to be talking about the things that definitely impact them. And this goes with that. And also do a service for the professionals that this is an exciting career path. You know, a lot of people, I think, if they're passionate about environmental, social, or governance causes, which I would argue the younger generation, I'm sure Beth can back that up, you know, they want to be working in this type of realm that is purpose-driven. And it only makes sense for us to open that door for them to see like they're still going to probably get that engineering degree or that economics degree or some sort of, you know, something like as a STEM source, but it can be used in these other ways. And Beth, I was telling Brian about this in our last podcast, but I was actually the lone non-STEM person in my master's program. You know, obviously my background's in marketing and business, and what I understood, whereas my classmates could easily talk about like the measurements, the technical pieces of it, what I was able to do was talk about how to actually motivate a leader to act, because that's ultimately where I think the relationship and the collaboration has to come together. And we'll talk about that in the study, where leaders have to get on board in order to make this happen. Otherwise a company can't truly achieve these goals without the leader support.
Right. Yeah, and absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you look at the next generation, the students that are graduating right now, so speaking both professionally as an academic, but then also of the choices that they're making are really based off of the company. What is that, not only the lifestyle, the work-life balance going to be, but also what is that company doing to either improve the environment from a sustainability perspective or what they're doing to hurt it. And so organizations, if they really want to get the best talent, not that this should be the reason why they're doing this, but this is what the current graduates are really looking for, is a place that they're going to be able to make a difference.
Yeah.
Because it's not all about money. Although back to your point with communication, we still have to have those, whatever it needs to be, whether it's key performance indicators or the financial impact, there's got to be some language that is meaningful across top management down to everybody else, so that we all understand the same things. And I think that's, especially from the ESG perspective, and I don't want to jump ahead to what we're going to talk about, but Lean has been so well established now for, well over 40 years just in the US. How do we get it so that ESG components are something that everybody's really talking about? And they understand, they know how to measure it, they know what it means, they understand the impact of it, because I think that's still a big learning curve there. That there's some fear that ESG is kind of a buzzword, but it's not going away. It's here to stay. Yeah, whether you're 22 or 60 and getting ready to retire, you still have a few years that you have to focus on ESG.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think it's also it all comes back to people. I mean, it's either going to be negative harm for people and causing them to move or suffer more harm during natural disasters, or it's going to change their way of life and make them shift where they're living because they can't do the things they've been doing before, or it's going to be that they're not able to access services that they need. I mean, we're talking about the environment or social aspect, but it ultimately is going to affect our neighbors and our friends and family. So this is took me a while to kind of get to that point again, but that's really what it's all about. We wouldn't worry about it so much if it wasn't going to cause us this disruption. And we're not sure exactly what that disruption is going to look like, but it will be something. Not to save the planet. The planet's going to be fine. We're going to be the ones feeling the effects of it. And so anything we can do to minimize it, even if there's already a lot of damage being done already, we can lower the pain or slow it down a little bit.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we talk about this, I keep going back in my head to the Shingo model that is respect and humility, right? And I think those are going to be key aspects where I think in a lot of organizations, the respect piece has been about respect for each other and the employees, but now it's also going to be respect for the local community, the planet. Like, how do we look at that respect from a broader view? And then humility to go, well, we're kind of not doing this how we should be, right? And say that we're doing some things inappropriately and let's fix them, right? And not be afraid to the environment, communities, and everybody involved.
Yeah. And one thing I found was interesting too, just being in my discussion modules, because I actually started my degree in September 2019, and then the world fell apart in early 2020 with the pandemic. But it was fascinating studying this topic during the pandemic because I felt that the pandemic actually heightened the importance of everything that you just said, right? Like that empathetic viewpoint that I don't think business had. Care for the environment wasn't part of the curriculum, and waste wasn't. I mean, it was considered a cost. It was considered a loss to the business, but it wasn't considered something that would have a negative impact for all these other reasons, right? It was more of you have a loss of profit or something like that. Especially coming from the retail space, I was kind of joking before too, like, retail, the whole point is more stuff. It's more stuff all the time, rather than, thinking about, is this really what we're selling? Would make a bigger impact if the product was designed differently or if it was meant to be consumed differently. So I think this topic has also become very political, unfortunately. Like when we do our analysis within IOE, really it's kind of fascinating to see that North America, or US in particular, is really the only spot regionally that has this much conflict over the concepts. When we look internationally at the EU or even Asia Pacific, they look at it as just like a better way of doing things. It's not that they're so polar opposite to it. It's more like, oh yeah, that makes sense, like rather than an emotional step. Doesn't mean that they don't care about their surroundings or their community, but it's just it's viewed at a different rate as far as, like, I think it's packaged differently. It's talked about differently than what it's unfortunately turned to here. So coming out the other end of that degree was really important, I think, because it's, to me, we talk about quality being everyone's job. To me, that's now sustainability. Sustainability is truly everyone's job. And there's so many easy ways, like you were saying, just having a different mindset to pursue it. So.
Agree more. Anytime I'm in Europe, it seems like it's a given. Sustainability is, there's not a question. There's not a political stance. It's just, this is what we do. We breathe air and we make sure that we're taking care of the environment. Yes. And it's just very refreshing.
Yeah. Everyone likes clean water. That's the
right.
Like, who are you going to argue with against clean water? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Shall we jump into it? Got some slides to share. So we'll have a video of this available. Check out the slides.
If you're seeing this on video, what these are is the summary points that we wrote. Actually, my team and I write these focus studies and all the reports that we do from an Insights on Excellence perspective. And Insights on Excellence is the research engine that is available to our organizational members, so they actually partake in the data collection, and then they have access to a benchmarking tool that shows how they're performing against their industry, or also against regions of the world. And then they also get a custom report for their own company's performance as well, based on who took the survey. But for the mass majority of members in the community for both ASQ and ASQE, we then aggregate that data, we anonymize it, and then we publish these in findings. And these are free reports that are findable on the asq.org website. There's actually also a specific URL you can use, which is insightsonexcellence.org. And you just need to log in and download them. But the study that is most recent, so it's actually just published this last week on asq.org, and both of you are part of it. You're featured in it. This focus study in particular is utilizing lean to minimize waste within ESG initiatives. And the key the key points that we wanted to really articulate from both not only the findings in the research, but also the insights that both of you had contributed, is these 5 top main points, these core elements. And the first one is ESG practices rely heavily on core quality concepts, kind of what we were just talking about. More specifically, we see some of these emerging as continuous improvement, right? They're labeled under the continuous improvement bucket, but also risk assessment. So this is, I think, when we think about ESG becoming more widely adopted, it's really about risk. It's about mitigating that risk. And Brian, you kind of touched on that too with like the physical stuff, right? Like the safety of people, but also the safety of goods and buildings and things like that. This also plays heavily into cost of quality analysis, right? So if we think about, cost of quality has been something that's been a methodology that's been around for many years as well. It absolutely can also be applied to ESG. And then, of course, obviously the waste reduction aspect. So Beth actually already kind of spelled this out, but she's absolutely right that lean naturally fits within that sustainable development and ESG practices due to that focus on waste. So that's really that first key element. If we want to keep going, we can, because I think we kind of summarized that first bullet point and what our initial conversation was. So the second bullet point is historically cost of quality may not have accounted, but leveraging an ESG mindset can really further control those expenses, and it puts those expenses in a different light. This could also look at reducing those costs of defects up front when I talked about the product design being thought of maybe differently at the onset, and then also improve environmental conditions throughout that. Something that comes to my mind is excessive packaging for a product or something like that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the cost of quality aspect, because this is actually a topic we're going to be researching further this year.
When you talk about cost of quality, even though this is a concept that has been around for a long time, organizations still have a hard time even just defining their cost of quality. So typically cost of quality has the cost of good quality and the cost of bad quality, right? Bad quality we can quantify pretty quickly. We've got defects, we've got rework. We can quantify that part pretty good, but it goes back to that iceberg model, right? That probably most people have seen at some point in a quality course, where you can capture like that top part of the iceberg that's peeking out, and those are your defects, right? It's all the other parts that are so hard to quantify. When you lose a customer because you had defects and now they're going to go to the competition, you had to ship the defects back, all these other costs. And I don't want to get too far, off on a tangent from that perspective, more to make the point of historically companies have realized when they have a cost of quality, they might be, 75, 80% accurate of what that true cost of quality is. And so most organizations have really not focused on, let's spend time, money, resources, effort of truly quantifying those other things. A ballpark estimate's going to be good enough. So now when we talk about excessive packaging, I mean, that's a great example, Erin. That takes time, money, resources to put it into the, whatever the packages that somebody's buying. But now we also have to kind of quantify what else, how else do we have to get rid of that packaging? If we can recycle it, we can do other things. And so I don't know that organizations that, at least none that I've seen, are doing it well, of really trying to get an accurate cost of quality from that perspective. And they're typically not, the companies that I've worked with focus more of the cost of quality on still the quality aspect. When they're doing sustainability initiatives, they want to lump that into some other bucket of cost and not really integrate the two. And so I think this is where a lot of companies are really struggling, because while there's great websites out there that you can put in numbers, like this is my CO2 emissions, this is what it's costing me. Internally, there's still not a lot of great systems out there that organizations are using to really quantify this as a whole. And even from that perspective, they would still have to take the initiative from a senior leadership perspective of how are we going to take these costs, then use a Pareto chart, break it down to focus on what's important. And then we might hope that excessive resource use, emissions, things like that are going to pop up to the top. And then how do we handle them? So I think organizations would still struggle with, well, what do we do? Because most people don't have the right background within operations to really go after and focus on this, right? And to control those expenses.
No, I think those are great examples. And I know being active in the Sustainable Council that I am, a lot of times this is a big conundrum, like you said, for companies that are actively trying to crack this code, because it does all roll up into the carbon footprint. And if you're trying to say that, okay, we've measured our carbon footprint, cost of quality could actually be really useful in getting a much more accurate number than probably what they're doing. I know, Brian, you had some really good examples too, and what you gave us for your feedback, because you were talking more about like the process control too.
I agree with Beth that it is hard for companies to really get a handle on that. And it's probably a good way of estimating it by taking that number times 3 or 5 or something and getting the true cost there. Because it is, for example, if I scrap out a metal part, they might count the cost of the material at that point, purchase price of it, but all the processing and any disposal fees don't really get counted in that. So if that has to be taken somewhere or hauled off somewhere, that doesn't all get tied in. And so I think being able to take, landfill costs and hazardous waste storage and handling costs and how much of the energy is wasted, and that should be added on there. And that's hard to gather. How much you think it's all needed, but if you really break it down, you had a defect or quality issue and now you're staying late, and so you got to keep the lights on and the air conditioner running. That's not added in there to cost of quality. So when we start to show the impact, I think it does help show that there is a business case there. It's much bigger than people realize, but getting a good number is a challenge.
Yeah, and what you described, I hear in the sustainable circles, like they're talking about as externalities, right? It's like, how do you account for those externalities coming in and being accounted for from a business expense? And they're not in many cases, right? So it's really changing that mindset. And that kind of dovetails with the third bullet point, which is around those performance KPIs, right? So for those who are listening to the audio, the bullet point is performance KPIs or a quality management system that are not reflective of climate or socially relevant needs can make it extremely challenging for organizations to report transparently or achieve their ESG goals. And this is where right now in sustainable circles, there's a lot of chatter about the new legislation that was just passed, because this is going to become extremely important, especially in the United States, because legislation has changed drastically with California adopting their climate disclosure rules, and then also the SEC for the first time ever having a securities standpoint. They've drawn a line in the sand now that companies have to report some of these things. So if you think about this from they're looking at it from a operational standpoint to make sure that the company is able to back up their claims. If you're not accounting for all these costs, all these different potential areas of waste, or what we're thinking about is that carbon footprint again, this could become really challenging if the companies aren't also adjusting those performance KPIs and the QMS to effectively account for these areas. So it's kind of a fascinating space to watch. And I know that the bullet point is written a little bit more vaguely in that regard, but underneath it, there's, like you said, Beth, there's that iceberg effect, right? Because it's like the bullet point says one thing, but if you really unpack it, there's a lot there.
Really, and it goes back to the old quality adage, what gets measured gets done, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we're linking and managing our business to the right KPIs, then the focus of the whole organization should be going in the same direction, right? We should be focusing on one mission, one vision, right? Until organizations really adopt environmentally related KPIs, we won't be marching to the same drum. I think that's with the new legislature, that's going to be happening sooner than later.
I believe it's for fiscal year 2025 too, is when they have to start reporting on it, at least from the SEC perspective, if what I remember correctly. So.
Right. Yeah. And luckily, I mean, if we look at Europe, I think we can take some best practices over here in the US pretty quickly. I mean, they're really leading the game.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a big challenge, is trying to get some ESG metrics onto the scorecard and visibility at the high level so that they're tracking that. But we still have the same challenges that we currently have in a lot of businesses of flowing that down to a level where people say, well, how does this impact me? And is that system in place, the quality system, to take a top level metric down to the lowest level person? They say, I understand how I impact that metric, and translate that in a way that they don't just say, oh, that's just the top level thing. They're doing something, I know. Maybe we're going to do a recycling program, but they should be, no, in your process, this is how you can see traceability up to that level. That's really key. And I think that a lot of companies struggle with any metric getting flowed down adequately and correctly. But if you have a good system there, then it fits in nicely because you already have the infrastructure. It still goes back to basic business management. And if that's not working right, these aren't going to work either. So we have to have the fundamentals in place, daily huddles or some kind of scorecard reviews and trending of metrics and things like that. Those have to be in place.
Yeah, 100%. This comes back to some of the data we've seen too around the workforce skill set, that people, the concept of continuous improvement now should also include continuous learning for employees. And so it's like, even though if you don't go down the path of college, which is fine, if you go even to the trades, you think about how the trades are the technology that's advancing there so quickly. A lot of that flows back up into the ESG needs, because you think of, especially under the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of electricians, plumbers, people that are in those trade organizations and those trade type of fields that have a huge role to play in this too. So it's not just, I think for like the engineers or people that are more of the college educated base, it's also translating over into all other walks of life as far as different professions too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was just going to add that I think one of the things that we need to do here in the US is make it easily understandable to everyone. Right. I mean, I think we hear ESG, and there's so much that goes along with it, and then legislature, and it can be overwhelming. Right. So when it comes back to Brian's point, which I completely agree with, we've got to have systems in place to measure this, but we also need to make sure it's easily measured and quickly measured so that it's accurate. We're not taking up a whole lot of additional time to do this. I mean, back to just the general lean principles as well, too. Finding ways to make this as straightforward and easy for people to do as possible, and really taking away the confusion, right? Going back to operational definitions, things that just kind of make it fairly plain and simple, along with the training, so that people understand exactly how it relates to them. Because if I can't internalize how it impacts me, I'm going to have a really hard time getting on board, right? And doing anything to affect that change. So finding ways to really just make sure that this is readily accessible to everyone.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point along those lines too, because I was also thinking like what I like about the ESG acronym, and for those there's a lot of confusion out there, I think, of like why sustainability is used as a term versus ESG. And one of my professors, I think, said it best, where he was saying ESG is how you measure the performance of sustainability, right? So you have the environmental pillar, the social pillar, and the governance pillar. It's much more easy to create goals under an E, an S, and a G pillar that comprises your sustainability, to your actions of being sustainable. Whereas if you say, we're going to have sustainability goals, that might be a little harder to define from a KPI perspective, but you can absolutely make an environmental KPI. You could absolutely make a social KPI. So that's where I like, when we write a lot of our research, that's the lens I tend to help try to convey to people, because I think you're right, Beth, like there's so many terms, and I also think about the amount of acronyms that quality professionals love to use. And so I think when we look at the alphabet soup that's out there with this topic, I think if there any point that we can draw the through line or the connection to make it more attainable and make it more understandable, the better that we're at as far as achieving those goals. Because even if you start small, and I think that's the other thing too, I think a lot of people think that they have to go big. It's like, oh, we're going to start becoming sustainable, and it's like, oh, we're going to go green, and then they're all looking at each other going like, what does that mean? So it's if you can break a goal skill or a goal set down into, we have an E, we have an S, and we have a G, with this overarching goal of becoming more sustainable, then kind of, as you said, you can start measuring that. You can start building in the continuous improvement, the Plan, Do, Check, Act, all the different frameworks that are there. That adds up over time. And it's not going to happen overnight, but you have to get started somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It always makes me think back to Deming. His question was, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time?
Bite at a time, yeah.
Right? And I mean, the same thing with ESG, because if companies don't have a strategy and they don't have somebody really driving that strategy, it's going to be completely overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So how do we find a way to kind of ease people into it, right? Go after the low-hanging fruit, provide the training. So just like any other initiative, we need to have a strategy and provide the resources to make sure that it's going to be a successful initiative in the organization.
Yeah, 100%.
And I like your comment about the education aspect as well, that this is different. These are new concepts, even defining ESG versus sustainability. I know there's confusion about sustainability. Sometimes it's sustaining improvements. That's a different kind of sustainability. So I think it's really important that we get everyone on the same page inside of an organization, that this is what we mean by this and how we have an impact and where we're going to focus. Can't do it all, and why we're going to focus on there, and understanding the messaging and the communications around that, so they understand that this is not going away and it's important to the business and it's important to the customers. Otherwise, it just seems like, oh, this is another fad, or maybe this will go away when new administration comes in or rules change. If they look at it that way, then it's not going to take off. So they need to see the reason behind it and understand that that's like anything, you have to communicate it over and over again and explain it and teach people these new ideas, because you can't assume that they all have studied this or taken sustainability classes like we have.
Right. Well, I think it also goes back to just your industry too, like what matters to your industry, because we're talking about it at a very high level, but when you think about what industry you're in, certain things are going to matter more than others. So like if you look at the tech industry, energy, anything that plugs in, or they have minerals in their microchips, they're going to be looking more at like the raw material, like rare minerals, or they're going to be looking at energy. So those two factors, if we want to call them natural resources, those are like most impactful to them. Whereas if you're in the food and beverage industry, water or agriculture, so it always, I think these concepts are great to illustrate from a high level perspective, but then when you look at the standards or the practices that are specific to the industry, that can also help, I think, clarify quite a bit, because then it makes your materiality or your priority items much more clear to build your ESG strategy around that. But yeah, it kind of goes back to that. It's all about the continuous learning and helping employees succeed in that. It kind of goes into that. We're talking about more of the baseline performance, or like people who are maybe just emerging into this. The fourth bullet point that I wanted to get to, because this is where I actually really like talking about like the very future state, or modern concepts here. Circularity is something that really intrigues me just personally. I think probably especially coming from the retail industry, like I saw so much waste there, especially like with fabrics and things like that. But circularity, I think, has a huge opportunity, especially for lean practitioners, because it actually is kind of to me, it's the and then piece of lean. So it's like if you're already doing lean well, this is kind of that elite version of that, because you're thinking about circularity of, and it's a leading ESG design concept to promote sustainable consumption and production by really rethinking those use of materials, but it can be applied to improve processes while reducing waste and costs that lean already champions. So that fourth bullet point that we have in our focus study. But I would love to hear more, both of your perspectives on this, because I'm really jazzed by this. There's a few companies out there that are doing it well, but I think it's scalable, and I think it could be something that is really exciting for the industry to pursue as far as the quality industry.
This is another area that I'm really super excited about as well too, and absolutely fascinated by. So like Erin, and I've just more recently become more involved with there's a sustainability initiative here in St. Louis, and learning about different aspects of new businesses and startups that are around this area, which I'm going to sound old here, but I'm really, really excited about this next generation, because I've been meeting so many individuals in their, early, mid, late 20s that are starting businesses that are really looking at what we're doing and how they're going to address it. So here in St. Louis, there's a really great startup that's taking used sports equipment. A lot of the sports equipment can't be recycled. So they're bringing it back to like new condition, and then they're getting it out to youth that are underserved that need sports equipment so that they have access to things. And so really great initiative. I was in LA 2 weeks ago. I guess I'll just go ahead and say the name of the organization, but LA it's called LACY, the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. Very cool facility in downtown Los Angeles. I was doing Lean Six Sigma training, and they're tied into sustainability, and they're helping a lot of organizations with their startups. One was taking things from the apparel industry, breaking it down to cotton, and then basically recycling and reusing those materials. So there's a whole rapidly growing economic sector that's really looking at how do we consume these materials that have been used and now reuse them for the greater good and to help the local community. And I think we're just going to continue to see more and more of those aspects happening. Also thinking about just buying patterns in general. I think we've seen a lot of, I'll go to the restaurant industry, a lot of chains have started going under because people are more interested in the farm to table concept and supporting local businesses. And I think when we start seeing buying patterns in apparels and other industries, we're going to see more people focusing on organizations that are sustainable. So I think at some point we'll see some sort of labeling or criteria that goes out there so that we know, right, what's considered sustainable, how it's ranked. But I think current businesses certainly focusing on this, but I'm really excited about all these new startups that are coming out that are figuring out better ways to make sure that how we impact the environment, we're either taking things that are already out there and reusing them for the greater good. And so I'm sure Brian has a lot of examples with all the work that he's doing as well.
Yeah, there is some really cool businesses cropping up and, trying to make a go of either, taking waste that no one wants and doing something with it or trying to avoid it, whether it's bold reuse in Portland, Oregon, has a whole system for to-go containers. Get an app and then you go to go, or if they had a lot of food trucks in Portland, 50 or 100 food trucks all in one little area. And everyone would leave with to-go containers. And so they came up with a reusable to-go container. And then you bring it back and that's your deposit back. And then they wash it and clean it and take it back to the vendors. And then if you had the app, then you give them that and they give it to you in a different container. And that's spread to now like coffee cups and some kind of program to basically take these single-use plastic items and get them out of the stream, and so that there's some circularity to that. And you're seeing that at events that you go to, that they're collecting the cups and cleaning them and recycling them through and putting deposits on them. So there is some kind of circularity being built there. So that's really cool to see. And hopefully those business models are good enough that they can withstand it and make a profit and be sustainable themselves. Or to taking clothing that are getting thrown away and trying to fix and mend them and get them back into the marketplace at a discount for customers while keeping them out of the landfill. So there are some really cool things happening. There's a couple other things that I think circularity can really be good for businesses, especially if they're not looking to start something new. One is when we study our processes, we're trying to connect all of our different departments together. This is really critical on the larger the business is, as over time the businesses become siloed. Mm-hmm. And you have department heads and then they have teams of people below and they start optimizing their own work. And you lose connection with the rest of the business. And so when we value stream map, we're trying to bring all these departments together and say, remember the goal is the customer. We've lost sight of the customer and all this growth. How do we get back to that? Look horizontally through our different departments. Some cool things that happen and have been going on in a lot of different states is industrial waste and having a network of businesses that are saying, I've got this excess material. Does anyone need this or find use in it? And some will say, actually, I could use that for our processes. We're looking for filler material. That would be perfect for that. And now we keep it out of landfill and you build a connection with this business, including some that have taken their waste heat and pumped it over to the next door factory that provides heat for their processes. And so it's a lot of networking and connecting, not just within your four walls, but outside of in looking at your community and nearby businesses to make those connections to say, can you help us kind of help each other? I give you something you need, you take away something I don't want. So that's some really cool things I think that have been going on for a while. And I think growth in those areas is really something all states should be doing. And then the other part was the ability to go to your customer and say, what can we offload from you or take back from you that we could reuse or recycle or do something with? You don't know what to do with this. You just want to get rid of it. Maybe we can take that back. And now we've created more touch points with our customer and we start to get, some trust built up. We get into their processes. We say, we could do some other services for you too. I noticed you do this and this. We could do that for you. That's a lot of wasted time and effort. And now we're incentivized to have sustainable packaging because we're going to come back through and use this over and over again. And we have to take the packaging. So now it's an incentive for us to come up with better ideas. The use of the material, if you're in that flow, now you're getting signals back, which is what we want in a lean process, is triggers and signals of actual usage from our customers, not their orders and what they scheduled to buy from us, but how are they actually consuming it, time period and frequency. And now we're in the loop and we can better send signals back to our site on what they actually need at the right time. So I think those things, if businesses look at it from that perspective, is how is this going to help us grow our business and be better for our customers? I think it opens up huge possibilities that isn't just about being green, but it's actually serving their customers and growing the organization, hopefully in a sustainable way, that we're not just consuming more stuff, but in a smarter way and a more eco-friendly way.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up those points because one of the best, I think, ways to think about circularity too is that it's not actually a very new concept, surprisingly. We think about, like, we used to have milkmen that delivered your milk and you would leave out your empty milk bottles and they would take them back. And, when I was telling my parents what I was studying in my sustainable degree and I used that in my dad's like, you're getting a degree in that? I'm like, no, I'm like, it's not milkmen. I'm getting a degree in the concept of what we had for, you think about the human race, like we actually used to be very, very good at circularity because we didn't have mass production and things were a lot different. You couldn't just run to the store to get something, right? You had to be very mindful in how you use your resources, how you, generated things from that. One of my favorite examples too is I go to Scotland quite a bit. We have friends there and I've had the luck of going quite a bit. When you tour a whiskey distillery in Scotland, I think they are one of the best examples of that true circularity model because what you just described, Brian, is having those really strong partnerships within your local community. So Lagavulin, I love it. They're an island, they're on Islay, but they buy Scottish barley to make their whiskey. But then when the barley is done fermenting, they sell it back to farmers to use as animal feed. So the barley actually stays within Scotland. It's grown in Scotland. It becomes the whiskey. It goes back to Scotland as far as the farmers go. And so when you think about the economic power that develops within a small, Scotland's small, right? It's not that big of a country, but they are helping themselves stay not only economically viable, but then you think about the amount of people that then buy, they export and they have tourism and things like that. There's so many like offshoots, I think, that circularity provides within an industry that if you just start to think about these things, and I think the other piece of it is like leaders need to allow their employees to think about these things because you know that empowering an employee to have that brain power and to have that job enrichment rather than job enlargement to make sure that the person feels like they're contributing, that helps with retention, that helps with loyalty, and you never know the kind of innovative ideas that might spring up through just kind of rethinking and opening that door to ask people, how can we do this better? And when I think about the Scottish tradition, to them that's just how they've been doing it for years, and now it has that label of circularity. And when you talk, when you go on tours there, they're like, this is just how we do it. And this is how we've been doing it forever. And they're like, but the Americans want to call it circularity. And I always crack up when I hear that because I'm like, that's right. Like we're thinking about it in a buzzword term, but to them, it's more the tradition. So, but they're very proud of it and they're making it work. And they're actually setting, I think, a great example for other industries to follow in other countries.
What was the name of that distillery?
Lagavulin is my favorite. Just actually, fun fact: if you're a Parks and Rec fan, that is also Ron Swanson's favorite whiskey. So Lagavulin is on the Isle of Islay, but Glenmorangie or any of the Speyside or most of Scotland's distilleries are practicing that. And there's actually a cool to plug Scotland for a moment because I love it. They have a nonprofit organization called Zero Waste Scotland that literally is an arm of their government, their parliament, that helps all sizes of companies throughout the nation of Scotland become more sustainable, and circularity is a huge piece of that. They have literally like a network of people, including, which I think is pretty incredible, some volunteers and citizen science and things like that, like where people will volunteer to help. And I think it's it kind of comes back to that concept of having purpose, right? It's like, how do you help your community? How do you help each other and have those better relationships? So it's a really cool thing, and I've been looking at their model for quite some time, and I use them actually in some school projects that I've done.
We need more of that here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The last bullet point we can touch on here, because I think this kind of has a nice way to kind of sum it up, and we've kind of all, I think, touched on this, but the fifth bullet point is about adopting that lean culture with the advanced practices in ESG. So it's that and then piece really can provide that career pathing, and especially for people who are motivated as far as, employees, or maybe even they need a transition, right? So if we think about how automation is affecting businesses, and we think about how companies are transforming to meet modern needs, this could provide new ways for people to gain new skills, create, transition in their career, and really meet those new goals of the company. And I think, myself, I've been through my own career transitions. Like, my job originally in publishing was taken away by the internet. And at the time it was like, what's this new internet thing? And it's like, well, people weren't consuming information in the same way anymore. And so I decided personally, I need to make a change. I need to transition to something new. And I did. But I'm so glad I did, because a lot of the skills I think that I grew up, kind of formed my initial career with, a lot of them is translatable. And I think that's the other thing too, is people get afraid when they think about having to make a change. But it could also be really empowering and really enlightening, and something that maybe, kind of, Beth, you kind of touched on it, like you didn't plan on necessarily going into some of these things, but now that you're in it, you love it. And, it probably has enriched your life in so many ways that you didn't expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, the lean culture perspective, if we just look at that before ESG, so many organizations struggled with that because it was more of a manufacturing concept initially, right? With lean. ESG, though, is kind of it impacts everybody. And I think that's just part of the message, that as we go through this transition, really focusing more on how ESG impacts not only us, our children, our community. I think it's going to hopefully resonate, and we won't have the same struggles of what we faced with the lean culture. And Brian can, with all of his experience in lean as well, has probably heard, lean definitely is not an acronym, but, at some companies it was used negatively, right, to cut heads and like cut back resources. So people created an acronym as less employees are needed around the lean perspective. But I think we've gotten over that hurdle, and people understand that lean is really just a way of making our processes better so that we can deliver better value to our customers, make our jobs hopefully easier so that we can focus our efforts on really critical thinking and making improvements. I'm hoping that the ESG integration into our lean activities and just within our organizations as a whole is going to be a much easier hurdle to get over, just because people are more motivated typically to make sure that we're going to have, a good place to live, and we're going to have a community, and all of the aspects that really go along with ESG are good. I think the biggest hurdle is still just going to be the training and the understanding of what ESG really means. And I think, and Erin, you touched on this really nicely when you talked about the E and the S. It's funny though, I think my concern is going to be a lot around the G and the governance perspective, because I don't know that people know what the governance perspective really is going to be, and how that's going to be, how it will impact them really. Who is this governance coming from? How's it going to change my job? How is that going to impact what I have to do? And so I think that's the piece that we're going to have to be somewhat careful about. In the US, not everybody loves legislature.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I won't go down the political path, because we're just in a very interesting time right now. But I think the governance piece will be the harder part to tackle. I think from my perspective, I've focused more on the E and the S part, right? Because those are easier parts to really integrate. I don't know if Erin, if you want to add something to that, or if that sounds like it's maybe resonating a little bit with you as well.
Oh, 100%. And I'm glad you touched on it, because the governance piece, yes, the word governance itself can make people very leery of that. But I think if we think about it, it also means standards. It also means safety. It means accountability. It means you're caring for people in a way, because, if you think about, like, for those of our generations who were born before the 70s, the APA didn't exist. And there were horrible cases of, lakes being poisoned. I mean, there's that great book by Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, where she talks about, the pesticide use, and that the birds, they didn't have birds chirping. Like the spring was literally silent because pesticides had killed birds off. And you think about, if you've grown up post 1970, you've had, especially in the United States, I should say in the United States, oddly enough, the EPA was created by a Republican. That was Richard Nixon who created the EPA. So you think about this, like there was huge bipartisan support for many decades, actually, that led to the safety elements that we have today. Now, of course, there were industries that didn't like it because they felt that it was added cost or was whatever, that they pushed back on. But I would argue that we have healthier people, we have healthier communities, we have healthier society, and especially in the States, without those regulations, it would look very much, very different, right? And for all the people that suffer through horrible health ailments, as far as cancers or things like that, like this is all coming back to, the ESG principles are really meant to protect each other and protect ourselves and the people who we love and who we want to, have healthy lives. And I think if we boil it down to the cost only, or we boil it down to the, I need to get minerals to make my product, or I need to get water to make my product. It's like, great, but you're also impacting the society in which you live. You're also impacting, like we were talking about before, the talent and the people that want to work for you, because they want to make sure that they are doing work that's meaningful, that has purpose. And I think the last part I'll add is that the governance piece, especially, like we live in a digital era, like even 50 years ago, you would have not heard about issues until maybe days or weeks after the cap. We now have instant realization of something happening. It's overwhelming, it's challenging, but at the same time, like as a company navigating these waters, you got to make the right decisions, because this could become a PR nightmare for you very quickly if you are not keeping your house in order. So that's why I'm saying, like, use it as a framework to operate in rather than resist it, embrace it, and it actually will make you more sane. It'll make you, like when you're navigating all the different spinning plates of trying to keep a business afloat, this is actually meant to help you move forward positively. And you'll have better customer loyalty, like all the things that Brian was talking about, the supplier relationships, the customer loyalty, all those things come with it. And I just think from a brand equity standpoint, like you can't go wrong adopting ESG or sustainability, because it just helps your company overall maintain that higher brand reputation. So that's my soapbox answer, but that's what I kind of am passionate about with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, because it's all in how we define and present governance, right? Mm-hmm. Because we immediately go to governance as they're going to tell us exactly how to do things. And that's not necessarily it, right? It's how do we put practices and policies in place so that people are safe, right? And it's not meant to add more bureaucracy and other things. It's really about doing the right thing to make sure people are safe. I'll get off my soapbox too, but say, I mean, it's really in how it's presented. So it's not some scary topic. It's not some scary word that it's governance. It's doing the right thing to make sure people are safe and taken care of.
Yeah.
And then it's not scary, right? We all want to do the right thing. We all want to keep each other safe.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know we're coming up to time, Brian, but I'll just say, like, if people are interested in downloading and reading the focus study, there's graphics, there's a lot of things in here that illustrate the adoption rate of some of these things, because all of the answers that we aggregate within the study are from organizations that we either have as members or part of our Forbes Insights partnership, because we actually do research with Forbes as an institution, and they help us gather data from other parts of the world that we don't necessarily operate within. And it's fascinating to see the regional differences, or the ways in which we are able to aggregate those answers to see how different regions of the world and how different industries are reacting to these types of questions that we pose. So I really invite everyone to download the study, because it's probably going to help them also make a case at their own company for approaching everything that we just talked about as a group.
I'll just add one more thing on the last bullet there, but if a company or organization hasn't looked at some process improvement methodology, I think that's definitely something they should look at, just to operate more efficiently, more effectively, less wasteful, things just run smoother, more predictable. Like, that's just good, just to not have the stresses and the frustration that you take every day to work, and get rid of some of that. That's just a good to have across the board. And there's lots of great methods and techniques that are out there that can help you do that. It's not easy. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. It does take a lot of work. It takes a change in mindset, a way of leading and managing that has to change. It's not just about frontline workers changing, doing things faster or more efficiently. So that alone will naturally get some positive benefits. You're not wasting your time and effort on stuff, and hopefully you're having less impact on ESG metrics. So definitely, companies that are doing process improvement have a leg up in that respect towards those goals, as they're probably going to be in a better situation. And they already have the infrastructure in place, like I talked about. And so, there's so much opportunity that a lot of organizations aren't doing it or aren't doing it very well. They might have tried some stuff, or they did a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's not really holistic. And so I feel like there's just a plethora of opportunity to embed improvement principles into all organizations, even the most mature ones. Toyota will be probably the one that studied the most, and it's probably the furthest along. And they'll say, we are just getting started. We have so much more to do. We're so far away. And so if they don't think they're done or anywhere near being done, then we're all way behind. That opportunity just seems endless to me. And as things change, then you're going to get new challenges and new issues. So it's never ending. It's continuous improvement. But then we also look at, what about the organizations that aren't part of this study, aren't engaged? Like, we have government agencies that are managing a lot of the social processes, that are providing aid and trying to deal with homelessness and trying to deal with these other social challenges that are out there. How do we get some of our process improvement techniques to those groups and the nonprofit organizations that are kind of cleaning up a lot of the gaps there, where people fall through the cracks of those processes, and they're trying to help them? How do we get them to be able to operate as efficiently as possible with limited funds and be effective in their work? So when I think about the nonprofit and government agency space, I think that's ripe for opportunity. And you're seeing that start to take off, but there's probably more that aren't doing anything or aren't aware of these methods than that are. To me, when I think about career paths, I mean, you could go into any organization and bring in ESG or process improvement skills, no matter what maturity they are, and help them. And you can go to organizations that have never heard of this and bring that as well, because it does affect everybody. And so it doesn't really matter which organization you end up working at or starting. You have to do all these things. I don't know how you can operate a successful business or agency without having some of these things in mind. I think you're always going to be missing a lot and missing out on a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, agreed. Well said. I'll provide the links for you, of course, so everyone can download. But this is available through the ASQ.org website. So we have a full library, actually, of ASQE's research around the Insights on Excellence topics. Fun fact, we've actually been talking about sustainability and quality, the intersection of the two, since 2022. So we have several reports out there that talk about it from a holistic business sense, think of organizational performance excellence. But we also then have studies such as this, which really go in deep to a certain concept or a methodology, and what does it look like for use case scenarios, right? And we're actually really happy to be working with subject matter experts such as yourself. We've now officially hit the 50 number. We've now worked with over 50 ASQ subject matter experts from the technical communities to bring this research to life. The IOE tool that is the data aggregator, or the tool that we use to gather data, has actually been also reviewed by subject matter experts from ASQ. So this is definitely a cross-functional effort. So we think of it as by the members, for the members. And this research, we really encourage people to download the reports, think about how can they use this type of feedback to build their own cases, right? So I think the three of us just talked about great use cases for any company to start this journey. Our hope is that the data that we're showing and the recommendations that people such as yourselves provide in the research that we do helps inspire people to get moving on this stuff. And it also can help, I think, be validating too. Like we said, this isn't easy. This is something that requires time and attention, but it's doable. So that's the whole point of IOE, is to make sure that those types of concepts and topics are being discussed. Because I think it's also important for the future of our societies too, not only from the association standpoint, but the societies in which we live.
Great. What's the best way for people to connect with you or get your book?
Oh, awesome. Thank you for the shout out. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Beth Cudney, and then my book's available through CRC Press, which is the division of Taylor & Francis, and it's called Lean Sustainability. Yes, and I want to thank you both. I've really enjoyed this project and working with you both. I'm always learning new things, and this was a great experience. There's so much still to learn. That's the one thing about life. We'll keep learning. So much more work to do.
Yeah, and I can't say enough about both of you working with you and bringing this research to life. We truly appreciate it, and we're going to have more opportunity too. So, more every year, more research comes out. We'll have different topics. For example, our next big industry report coming is healthcare, where we're looking at the IOE responses from that sector. So, yeah, keep bookmark the URL. It's insightsonexcellence.org, and we'll be featuring more and more subject matter experts from the ASQ technical communities.
That might be a good topic. Talk about healthcare a little bit more. I think that's
absolutely.
another one of those social processes and organizations that has done a lot of great lean work, but again, lots of opportunity, as we've all experienced going to the hospital or visits. So.
Especially single-use plastic. That's probably one of the biggest issues there. So
medical waste, yep.
Medical waste, yeah. There's some great activity happening here in St. Louis in that area. Yeah, I'll have to connect you.
Yeah, I was going to say we'll be in touch.
Yes, yeah, I'll connect you with some people.
Great.
Well, thank you too for all your help, and we'll get this released. And thanks everyone for listening. And hopefully we'll have maybe a future report. We'll have future podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank
Thanks
you
again.
Yes, thank you.